Hey, what's up, everyone? Jared Sandler here. Gonna start doing more of these videos, so would really appreciate if you would take a second and hit the subscribe button. And if you've got any feedback or questions in regards to the content, maybe comments, please be active in the comments section. Would love to hear from all of you and continue the conversation beyond just these videos. But if you could please subscribe. We're going to be bringing you conversations, not just from baseball, not just from basketball, not just from football, but whatever's relevant in the sports world. I'd say that those three sports will probably take up the highest percentage of the conversation, but we'll talk some hockey, we'll talk some golf, whatever is relevant. That's what we'll talk about. We'll also be bringing you interviews, serious interviews with central figures in the sports world, and some of the typical off-the-wall fun interviews with people in the sports world. Again, so if you could subscribe, would really appreciate it. But let's get going for today. Obviously, got to discuss The Last Dance. Episodes 9 and 10, the finale, took place last night. I've got 6 thoughts in honor of Michael Jordan's 6 NBA titles, some specific to the last 2 episodes, others more just general in response to the documentary as a whole. And the first thing is, going into last night, I'd give it a B. I think overall I give it an A- because of a lot of the written content that's come out over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, branching off of some of the topics that were discussed in the documentary. But in a vacuum, the documentary itself, I'd have given it a B. But it definitely gets a bump up because last night's 2 episodes, in my opinion, the 2 best episodes of the 10-part series. I really, really enjoyed it. And, there were some funny moments. There were some deep, profound moments. Maybe a little emotion as well when Steve Kerr discussed his dad's murder in Lebanon. But one of the funniest things was, and each episode it seemed like had a funny line or a laugh out loud moment. I loved Michael Jordan going out to Reggie Miller saying, "Don't ever talk trash to Black Jesus." That was a good line, and it was cool to really get an in-depth look at that series. Not when that line was uttered, but the series between the Bulls and the Pacers that went to 7. And one of the things that stood out was, the Bulls didn't just dominate their way to the NBA title their last 2 years. Whether it was the Pacers making it tough for them, and even though they beat the Jazz in 6 games both years, there wasn't a 7th game. Those were some close, hard-fought games. And it's tough to remember this, but because we always remember so much about the champion and not always the runner-up team. But the Jazz were really, really good. They had home court one of those years, and they were the number 1 offense in the NBA. So that was a really good team, even if they didn't have MJ and Pippen. I think that Steve Kerr came out the best of anyone in the documentary. Whether it was not backing down to Jordan, kind of being the underdog, hitting some big shots, being vulnerable with the telling of his father's murder and how it impacted him. And one of the things that stood out, and I really didn't know this about Steve Kerr, I knew that, he went to Arizona. I knew that he was a good but not great player there, but he barely even got a scholarship to Arizona. And you just think and there are a ton of these with every athlete, every team, every story, but if he doesn't get that scholarship to Arizona and doesn't get to play in the Pac-10 for, a big-time program, does he get the NBA opportunities as a player? Does he get the coaching opportunities in which he's really established himself as one of the best coaches in the NBA? It's just kind of crazy to think how one moment decades ago could impact a person's entire career and what we understand as basketball history. One thing I didn't know is the third thing here. I didn't realize that Brian Russell had talked crap to MJ during MJ's basketball hiatus. I didn't understand how poetic it was that MJ didn't just hit one, but hit a few big shots over Brian Russell. Of course, the one we all remember, the jumper to seal Game 6 in what was supposed to be Jordan's final game ever. But I didn't realize, it's just amazing how many of those moments, and maybe we're forgetting all the ones, or they didn't tell all the ones where Jordan said, "I'm going to come get you," and nothing ever materialized. But whether it was B.J. Armstrong or Reggie Miller getting back at him, the LeBradford Smith myth, or Brian Russell talking crap to MJ when he came to a practice during his baseball time and then he ends up getting Brian Russell in a big way. That was pretty cool. I didn't realize that. It's pretty nuts that MJ in his 6 championship runs only went to 2 Game 7s. The one against the Knicks during the first three-peat in the Eastern Conference semis, and then the one against the Pacers in the second three-peat in the Eastern Conference Finals in the final year, the last dance year. I mean, that's pretty nuts if you think about it. I understand that they were a dominant team, but to have all these series and to only have 2 Game 7s. And I know that the first round wasn't best of 7 at the time, but that's the one round where you expect a high seed like the Bulls to not have much trouble. But to only have 2 Game 7s, pretty crazy. I think the Rodman wrestling story in the middle of the finals, much like the midseason Vegas story, is just another indication of how this team and whether it was Phil Jackson's leadership and having the support of Michael Jordan, it wasn't conventional. You typically get suspended, you get benched or whatever, but Phil Jackson had an understanding of what made individuals tick and knew that it was different for everyone. I bet if Scottie Pippen left and went to a wrestling match during the finals, the reaction and the response would have been totally different. But that was Rodman. He was wacky. He was a little crazy, but you needed that, and he needed to feel that to be able to go out and do what he did. And I just think there's a degree of brilliance behind what Phil Jackson did. And, I've always thought he was a good coach. I've also always thought, well, it helps to have MJ and Pippen. It helps to have Shaq and Kobe. But I think what this documentary showed is a little bit of what made Phil Jackson special and why, as we've seen with LeBron, it's not easy to coach stars, why he's been able to do that with not just one, but arguably 3 of the 10 best players in NBA history. And then, the other thing, and this isn't a knock on Jordan, it's just more of an observation, a neutral observation. I thought it was interesting that Jordan, in the 10-part documentary, and things that have been written before, during, and after, we don't really hear a lot about close, deep relationships Jordan had with his teammates. I think he had a great working relationship with Scottie, and I think they get along fine. But you think about it, when you play on a terrible team, typically you're not having as much fun, and maybe it's tougher to develop these bonds. When you win 6 titles, even though only Pippen I think was there for all 6, Phil Cartwright was there for all 6 in some capacity, even if not as a player in all 6. And I might be missing someone else other than, of course, Phil. But as far as teammates, whether it's the group from the first three-peat or the second three-peat, you don't really hear much of Jordan having these strong connections with these guys. He had strong bonds and connections with his trainer, Tim Grover, with his security staff, but not the players. And he played golf with them, but Jordan will play golf with anyone, especially anyone who can gamble big dollars on the course, and those are going to typically be his teammates. Yeah, he'd play cards with his teammates on the plane, but again, you're kind of confined to a small group of people with whom you can interact. And I'm not saying he didn't hang out with his teammates. I'm not saying he wasn't friends with them, but it just didn't seem like he developed these strong, deep bonds with his teammates. And you think about like the Mavs, Dirk had deep bonds with some of the guys on that team, whether it was Tyson or Jet, J-Kid. You can tell by the way he speaks to them, they speak of him. And we see it out in the public in his relationships with Nash and Finn. Never really got that from Jordan. And you heard a number of times players and people talk about how it's tough to really connect with him. And again, not his fault, because he lived under a different spotlight than those guys. He was elevated on a pedestal way higher than even his fellow professional athlete teammates were. And I think maybe it was tough to connect, tough to relate. Again, not saying he wasn't friends, but to have those deep relationships, and they even talked about it. I thought it was odd that 2 things involving Steve Kerr. When Jordan and Kerr had the little skirmish at practice, Jordan had to call someone else to get Steve Kerr's number. He didn't have his own teammate's number, which nowadays seems really odd. And the second thing, when Michael Jordan's father was murdered, Steve Kerr, who had been played against him and got to know him, never felt like it was ever a comfortable place to talk with him about that. And it's just typically it's your teammates who you do share some of those moments with, because as you always hear, you spend more time with them during the season than you do your family. I just thought it was interesting. I know there's a lot of discussion. Is MJ a good guy? Is he a bad guy? All that aside, this is not necessarily a commentary on that. It's just an interesting observation of the way he kind of had to socially go about things, or not had to, but did go about things during his time. Overall, enjoyed The Last Dance. I think I'd bump it up from a B to kind of a B plus, A minus because of the last 2 episodes. The overall experience, I give an A because of some of the written stuff. And if you haven't read, some of the written stuff on any of these platforms, go check it out because they really get in depth on certain things, and it was really interesting. All right, want to hit a little football, want to hit a little baseball. Let's start with baseball. Blake Snell made some interesting comments over the last week on Twitch, in which he basically said, he didn't feel like it was worth playing for, whatever he would end up making with the reduced salary and taxes and agent fees, stuff like that, a few $1 million. And I think he went about it the wrong way. I think his tone and the way he conveyed his message was maybe in poor taste. But I don't blame him for the sentiment. I don't find any fault in the sentiment. If any individual player doesn't want to play, they don't feel like the money they're going to make is worth it, that's their prerogative. To me, it's no different than when you talk with friends and, you kind of have those hypotheticals. All right, would you spend 5 minutes in a cage with a lion for $5? Nope. Okay, what about $10? Nope. Okay, what about $1 million? Maybe. It's no different, than that hypothetical than what the players are dealing with. Is it worth going out there for $2 million and maybe risking your health? Well, for some guys, yeah. For other guys, maybe not. What about $10 million? Okay. For some guys, no, but now for more guys, it's probably worth it. And I don't have a problem, with each individual athlete in any sport saying, hey, until there's a vaccine, I don't feel comfortable playing. And it's not their fault that they're leaving X million dollars on the table. If anything, it's admirable that they're willing to leave that much money on the table, for the benefit of their health or their family's health. I just thought the way Blake Snell went about conveying that message was in poor taste. Finally, the Rooney Rule. The spirit of the Rooney Rule when it was first created to try and ensure more minority coaching candidates and executive candidates got interviews is great. The spirit behind it's great. The execution of it has been horrible. We've heard coaches say, they felt like they were just given an interview to fulfill the quota. It wasn't taken seriously. There really hasn't been a big change in the amount of minorities in coordinator positions, head coaching positions, GM positions. There are 2 minority GMs. I think there are 4 minority head coaches, and there aren't many minority coordinators. Something's got to change. And I don't think anyone who truly cares about this is saying you need to hire a minority coach for the sake of hiring a minority coach. I just think it's tough to believe that with as much minority participation there is in football, from a player standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, look at the coaching staffs, not necessarily just coordinators or head coaches, but look at all of the coaches that make up staff and how many minorities there are a part of those quote-unquote teams. And you're telling me that none of those guys or very few of those guys are worthy of a chance? The percentage of minority coaches overall compared to the percentage of head coaches and coordinators is just, it's not even comparable. And you know what? Someone said to me when discussing Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, who's a minority, well, maybe he's just a great coordinator and not a great head coach. That's possible. It's possible for minorities and non-minorities that that's the case. You might be great in this role, but not that role. But a lot of non-minorities get the chance to show that they're not a great head coach. A lot of minorities right now aren't getting that chance, and that's what's troubling. I don't like, though, with that said, I don't like the idea that we're going to give a draft pick incentive to teams. First of all, I think it's patronizing. Second of all, I don't think anyone is going to make that sacrifice. I don't think anyone's going to say, oh, I'm now more inclined to hire a minority